It was time. Days were getting shorter, and the four kingdoms of the continent of Riggs had come together for the 4-day-long ceremony to fight and bring Kinich back from his winter slumber. Practically everyone in all of the four kingdoms had come to Riggs City to celebrate. Most of the year, the city was empty, with a few exceptions, who chose to remain in the city all year long. But with the winter months getting cold, four kingdoms came together in the city to trade and celebrate the end of winter. We spent weeks traveling, gathering, and trading to get to Rig City. Inside the city, the mood was bright. All of the four kingdoms brought many goods and gifts to share and trade alike. Some families were spread across the four kingdoms, and the Solstice Ceremony and exchanging gifts and food was a common way of showing that you cared. And among the nobles of the four kingdoms, politics traded as easily as words and endured like stone. While the ceremony would have many parties, celebrations, plays, and feasts leading up to the solstice, the main show was the Kinich War, a grand fight that would pit the four strongest heroes of the four kingdoms against each other to figure out who was the strongest, and it would pit the four greatest creatures captured by the kingdoms in combat. When the fighting was done, the greatest hero would battle the greatest creatures at noon on the solstice itself and show the four kingdoms who was stronger, humanity or the beasts that we share the world with. It would help to know the four kingdoms and their champions before we get to the fighting itself. The North Kingdom brought in iron, stone art, and even elusive coal to trade with everyone. They brought in most of their food by fishing and salting the fish, which for some people is a delicacy, but that paled in comparison to the iron brought in from the north. The iron was nearly indestructible and highly desired for tools, although it was rarely used in weapons, with most people preferring bronze, wrought iron, and MSU steel. Still, even a few pans from the North Kingdom tended to be something passed on in the family for years. Their goods fetched good trades in the market, and as a gift, it would always bring you a kind word and an even kinder invitation. Their banners, flags, and family crests often had Edmontonia, which often roamed the coastal swamps of the Northern Kingdom. A powerful, squat herbivore with plate armor and spikes near the shoulders that inspired the armor of the Northern Kingdom's knights. The knight's armor was round and full of scutes that made it hard to get a handle, and most arrows bounced off of it. These knights also carried large maces that mimicked the tail of the Edmontonia's cousin, the Ankylosaurus. Brute force, they thought, would bring them victory in the ceremony. Both hero and monster alike epitomized brute force and armor of the Northern Kingdom. The Northern Kingdom hero was a blacksmith by the name of Diamond North. A blacksmith who stood over 2 meters tall and who was said to have made most of the armor and weapons of the Northern Kingdom, including her own armor and warhammer. A former blacksmith hammer that was forged to become part of a maul that she used to crush both bone and metal alike. A maul too heavy for most knights to lift, let alone use as a weapon. Rumor was she once killed a Pachycephalosaurus by crushing its skull with her maul, a dinosaur that rammed its head against others of its kind in displays of strength, a skull that was 25 centimeters thick and able to break down a stone wall. Diamond North was certainly going to be a strong hero with power to spare. The beast from the north wasn't an Edmontonia like displayed on the banner and what they used most years. Instead, they had obtained something that swam in the coastal swamps. Inside a large cage with the mouth tied down in heavy iron chains, was the king of the swamps, a Dinosuchus named Deathjaw, the largest crocodile to live in Riggs. 6 meters long with heavy armor and many sharp teeth that growled at anyone who got close to it. The tail was longer than its body, that was shaped like a paddle, allowing it to swim forward, both in fresh and salt water. This predator was patient and powerful, capable of taking down much larger Tyrannosaurus rexes, who came to drink from its watering hole. One of the deadliest creatures in the water, but it comes into question if those skills will translate to the land. The Western Kingdom had mastered turning their dry forest and plains into places that flourished with both fruit and herds. While metal wasn't as common to the West, they had learned how to tame many of the creatures that lived on the plains. They had eggs from both velociraptors and triceratops to trade. Their food was treasured by all of the four kingdoms. They didn't stop at breads like most of the kingdoms. They made pastries filled with honey, fruit jams, and even sausage and egg. Unlike the other kingdoms, they didn't just bring beer and mead, but also wine and vodka, which could not be made by any of the other kingdoms. Their drinks and sweets were always welcome at every party, and their food vendors were often the most popular, serving rare ingredients that could only be found in the Western Kingdom. People from other kingdoms tried their own variations, but most agreed that the original was oftentimes the best. Lacking large predators, the Western Kingdom's banner had a familiar herbivore on it, a golden triceratops head against a green background. They formed large herds and they were easy to train, making them a good source of meat and eggs for the Western Kingdom, and their droppings made rich fertilizer. Despite their herbivorous nature, they are fierce warriors when their herds are threatened, and that is reflected in the Western Kingdom's armor. Their bronze armor lacked scutes like the Northern Kingdom, but it still was sculpted to resemble scales. Their helmets had small horns above the eyes and nose to resemble the Triceratops. Ceremonial armor even had large frills to resemble a Triceratops. Their war armor had a very small ridge where the nose was. Their soldiers also carried very large, heavy shields that also functioned as a weapon with the seal of their kingdom on the front of the shield, while they carried a large trident made to resemble the Triceratops' horns. Their hero was a man of medium height and weight named Shepherd West, one of the many shepherds of the Western Kingdom. He was chosen not because of his great strength, but his great endurance. He was rumored to have even been able to run for 3 days to gather his lost Triceratops, and that he even fought off a rogue T-Rex that tried to eat his herd with just his shepherd's crook and a sling. He wore armor made of cotton that was soaked in salt water and dried, far lighter than iron, even if it wasn't quite as strong. His helmet was wooden and made to look like the head of a triceratops. He also carried a shepherd's crook and a sling, the very same he used to fight a T-Rex. A hero that was either humble with his weak weapons and armor, or arrogant for believing they can equal everyone else's. The beast brought in matched their banners. A large triceratops bull, the largest in Shepherd's herd by the name of Goliath, a musking bull that was aggressive in his cage of bone, and was painted by the many hands of the Western Kingdom, covering the three-horned giant in red paint that made it look bloody in torchlight. Triceratops may be herbivores, but they are fierce protectors of their families, and musking males are aggressive to anyone close to them. their sharp horns able to fight nearly any creature on the continent. But it is not known if the other creatures could take advantage of Goliath's heightened emotions. The southern kingdom, my kingdom, was covered in both rivers and grasslands. Unlike the western kingdom, however, we didn't raise Triceratops. We raised Struthomymus, large bird-like bipeds that provided meat, feathers, eggs, and even used them as cavalry. Our banners had the Struthomymus on it as a show of our kingdom's primary export and beast of burden, and our best lancers could take down large dinosaurs at a full trot. Where the Western Kingdom provided pastries and drinks, and the Northern Kingdom provided metal and stone, the Southern Kingdom provided poultry and leather. However, as useful as the creatures were, they aren't the most useful in a fight. They prefer flight over fight, and they're less than 2 meters tall. While you can certainly scare one, and it would be a dangerous creature when set loose on the farm or village, in a fight, it would be like releasing a cranky teenager against an armored battalion. Our soldiers, normally dressed in leather armor in layers that were designed to resemble the head of a baryonyx and other carnivorous theropods on the plains. They used lances, spears, long swords, and bows on dinoback in cavalry charges. Our archers were capable of hitting moving targets from half a kilometer away, with arrows that could penetrate scale, plate, and chain alike, able to bring down even the mighty Titanosaurus with a single archer. Our captured creature was a cruel and intelligent bipedal predator that stalked the rivers and coasts of the Southern Kingdom. A predator that stood 2.5 meters tall, with 95 sharp teeth, and a crocodilian mouth and tail, with wicked claws on its greedy hands and clever feet. A baryonyx called the Smiler. A predator that was dwarfed by the much larger T-Rex and Spinosaurus, but it was an incredibly clever and patient predator. This baryonyx got its name by the fact it often lured children away into the darkness, using its smile and the ability to mimic human voices. The Smiler had killed over a dozen until it was captured by myself. I am Lancer South, an accomplished lancer and spouse to the monarch. I wear leather armor in layers of both silk and dinosaur leather to protect me from both arrows and blades alike. And while I usually have a lance, for this fight I have just a shield and a sword, weapons that I had made during my quest to win the monarch's hand in marriage. I had to feed a village with a single hunt, I had to march through the swamp in a single night, and I had to make a sword and shield from the metal of a fallen star, the bones of a T-Rex, and the leather from a Spinosaurus. All that I had to kill myself. Even the star I had to kill. All quests I took in the name of the monarch, and my spouse was so impressed, they put me into the competition, believing me the greatest hero of the Southern Kingdom. While I am clever, and I am determined, I know that I am not as strong nor powerful as any of the other heroes. And even though I captured the Smiler, there is a dark part of me that believed that the Smiler wanted to be captured and brought here. The final kingdom was the Eastern Kingdom, the most heavily forested part of the continent, the part that brought in the most of the medicines, lumber, and rare predators for both pets and war animals. The materials they brought for the celebrations was just a taste of what they could bring, and they often arranged trade deals for the rest of the year with the other kingdoms. Their wealth and negotiations often earned them special places in the parties along with everyone else. Their banner was nothing short of the ferocious Tyrannosaurus rex. Banner no one is willing to challenge because the Eastern Kingdom often brought the very best beasts to be beaten, battered, bested, and broken. They often wore scale mail that was often loud and useful for scaring away many predators that learned to fear the sound of the soldiers. Their armor was painted to resemble the feathers and scale of the Tyrannosaurus rex, with helmets shaped to resemble the head of the king of the lizards. They often used battle axes and short swords in conjunction with wooden shields painted with the symbols of their clans. Their weapons are also their best tools in cutting down trees and leading raids to the islands to both west and south of Riggs. Their hero, Fisher East, was a tall, broad-chested man who stood almost as tall as Diamond North. He wore scale mail like others of his clan, but he also had numerous tattoos of his victories inscribed on his chest, and his axe and shield are legendary for being made by him out of the redwoods of the islands to the south. It is said that he was left behind on purpose on one of the islands to the south by his own king, who wanted him dead. He only had an axe head and his armor with him on an island with no people and no animals. So he took the axe head and he carved himself a new handle and shield, and he cut down one of the redwoods, shaping it into a boat, eating the rare fruits of the island and whatever fish he could catch. He then took the boat back home after 3 long years, and he found the king, who left him behind to die. Fisher left the man alive, but relieved him of his arms and legs, leaving him in the care of his wife and children in the dungeon. Fisher then made himself king, and he became known as the greatest raider of the Eastern Kingdom. A violent but shrewd man whose strength may be the greatest of all the heroes here. However, unlike everyone else, he has no experience in fighting dinosaurs, and he's a raider, not a warrior, and not a hunter. The beast they chose was different from what they usually capture. Usually the Eastern Kingdom brings in the Tyrannosaurus rex, a strong display of power and usually the beast that wins Battle of the Beasts. This year, however, Fisher East had his kingdom bring in the former king's prized possession, a massive Spinosaurus named Prince, with golden scales, a long paddle-like tail, and a short sail that was mostly for show rather than something practical. Prince was often used for executions, and a showy example of power, and easily the largest monster here. Although whether a pampered pet would amount to a fierce competition is anyone's guess. These games were anyone's game, and the head of the tournament, the matriarch of Riggs, a very old, very wise woman who was the matriarch of all of the 4 kingdoms in either blood or marriage. Even King Fisher was a distant relative of hers. She would head the games every year, and she would alternate which kingdom she stayed at each year, allowing political balance between the 4 kingdoms. On our first night, we shared our heroes' stories around the bonfire, visible to all 4 kingdoms. Thousands of eyes watched me as I explained how I used my bow to bring down a star from the sky, taking the stellar iron to make my sword and shield. I watched along with everyone else, cheering for Diamond, talking about crushing a dino's skull with a single swing as she spoke with her hands. I cried with everyone when Shepard told us all about how that T-Rex decimated his herd and home, and I roared with laughter at the fall of the old East King with everyone else. Our stories were our pride and our power that we shared with everyone. Then it was the matriarch's turn to speak. She stood, and the crowds fell silent. Even the babies stopped crying. The wind stilled, and the crickets stopped chirping. All of Primeval seemed to listen to the matriarch with bated breath, and she reminded us the purpose of the Solstice Ceremony. The purpose of the ceremony isn't just to remind us about how powerful we are, but also how vulnerable we are before the power of nature. We have taken 4 of our best, our greatest heroes from all kingdoms, and 4 of the best beasts that could be captured. But in our hearts, we all know that just because it was the best beast captured doesn't mean it was the strongest beast still out there. The matriarch said, and we all nodded in agreement. We thought back to our own examples. The creatures too large, too strong to kill. The creatures too aggressive, too clever to capture. The creatures too quick, too silent to see. We all had known about creatures like these, and even as tactics and strategies change every year, there is always a bigger dinosaur, always a new beast to best, always a new challenge on the horizon. There is pride in being the kingdom that brings in the strongest beast, but there is also humility in that reminder. The beasts will fight to the death, and we all know that makes them more desperate and more dangerous. The heroes will fight until they yield, and the winning warrior will lead the fight against the final beast, slaying it with all of the warriors fighting together. Do you know why the winner only leads and doesn't fight alone? The matriarch asked the crowd. The elders and the adults knew the answer, but it was now the time for the youngest among us to speak, to understand and to know the answer, deep in their hearts. One of the children spoke up. In the light of the bonfire, I did not know what kingdom they were from, and neither did anyone else. But in that moment, that child spoke for all 4 kingdoms as they addressed the matriarch. Because no one person can best all beasts. We work together so we can stay in rigs, the child said, and the woman who was so old, no one remembered her name, not even herself, nodded and added to what the child said. No matter how powerful we are, from the strongest blacksmith, the most humble shepherd, the fastest lancer, to the mightiest king, can fight the entire world by themselves. This isn't just a show of our power as individuals, but also a show of our weakness as individuals, and our strength when we work together. Even when we are strong alone, we are stronger together, she said to the cheers of the crowd. Although there was silence among some of those in the Eastern Kingdom, if the matriarch noticed, she did not show it. Tomorrow at noon, the beasts will fight in the stadium. For tonight, we eat, drink, and be merry. We will trade goods, stories, and vices tomorrow morning, she said to the laughs of the crowds before she continued. After the fight, we will feast and we will prepare our warriors for the fight afterwards. So, enjoy your night, she said to the cheers as we enjoyed ourselves. I ate with my spouse, who was happy for the quiet in our tent, while most of our kingdom partied with the other kingdoms. Something unexpected I had learned from being married to the monarch was there was a lot of responsibilities. People come to them for advice all hours of the day. During the day, they often resolved disputes between members of the kingdom, and it was there I saw their wisdom, which attracted me to them in the first place. One example was before I married them, my family owned a grazing plain next to a mine, and the mine kept piling up the soil from the mine onto the field, causing the grass to not be able to grow, and it hurt our flocks who had less to graze over. So we brought our troubles to the monarch, who heard both of our pleas. We said with our fields dying because of the pile-up, we would soon lose all of our land, and the mine owner, a powerful noble, said he needed to put the soil somewhere and the fields were closest. The monarch agreed it was only fair the soil had to go somewhere. However, it was only fair that we were compensated as well. So they said for every sack of dirt from the mine in our hands, the mine owner would owe us a sack of silver of the same weight. They gave us until the end of the month to show how many sacks of dirt were on the plains. So my family and the mine owner's workers went to work cleaning up all of the polluted soil away from the land. Even though we had a dozen sacks of soil, the mine owner cleaned away hundreds of sacks of soil. So we brought our sacks to the monarch, who had them weighed, and the mine owner had to pay it out. He was smug because he thought he had cheated us out of hundreds of sacks of silver. But the monarch reminded him this would happen every month. So now every month my family gathered a few sacks of polluted soil, and the mine owner was forced to clean up the rest. It ended up costing him more in the long run to clean it up himself than it was to just keep it off our land. So in time, the mine owner just gave up the mine when he realized he was paying all of the silver in the mine to us. That was wise in my eyes, because the noble thought he was getting away from punishment by cleaning up his own mess, which was what we wanted to begin with, and our family made enough silver to get through hard times. So I asked the monarch if I could marry them, and they sent me on my quest. So now here I was in the same tent as them, their silver eyeshadow dull in the candlelight of the tent, their golden robes replaced by brown pajamas, their short hair perfumed and oiled for the night. As they lay next to me, I held them close and they held me close. Our marriage was a marriage du blanc, which was a relief to us both. But still, I comforted them on their long days, and they comforted me. There were advantages to being married to the most powerful noble in the kingdom, and there were advantages to being married to the wisest hero. We slept through the night, and in the morning we went out to negotiate new contracts with merchants of other kingdoms. The monarch was silent, and I spoke on their behalf, not out of arrogance, but because they were anxious speaking in public. So I learned to pay attention to their micro-expressions to know what they did or didn't desire. So we would walk up to the merchants who were grateful to work with royalty, and they would often try to screw us out of decent deals. Having the monarch silent the entire time and having the merchants focus on them rather on me often made the negotiations more advantageous to us. Once we were negotiating for strawberries from the Western Kingdom, the initial price given to us was too high, but while I was measuring prices in my head to see what would be a fair price, the merchant immediately dropped it below what I thought a fair price was. Apparently, he didn't want to lose our business. So, after hours of negotiating prices, we went to the royals' box to watch the battles below. The stadium was large enough to fit all four kingdoms, at least 200,000 people. The royals sat in the boxes above, with champions in separate boxes. I was a rare exception, being married to the monarch, and Fisher East got to sit in his own champion box, the matriarch sitting where the king of the East was supposed to sit. When we were alone, the monarch let out a sigh, and they slumped in their throne, away from prying eyes. While they did that, I massaged their back and reassured them as they let their mind relax from the stresses of managing resources for the rest of the year. While we relaxed on and snacked on apple pie bites, while the field below us was prepared for the fight between the beasts. Part of the dirt below was dug down a couple of meters to give Deathjaw a place to swim, and the arena was filled with logs, ferns, and even a couple of rocks to make the arena appear more like the wilds of Riggs, without completely denying the view below. Before iron gates stood ready to be lifted. The beasts within were eager to leave, and all they would have to do is lift the gates. There was no time for speeches today. The speeches were reserved for yesterday and tomorrow. Today was the day of blood. All four kingdoms chanted the names of their favorites as the cheers rang through the stadium. Others cheered out a single word that held a lot of power, but it also meant almost nothing. Nika was not quite as loud as everyone else's chants, but it was still there. The cheer simply meant win, but it was also used as a cheer without showing support for any one beast or hero. No names, just calling out for victory. And every year it rang out clearer as I joined those calling out for victory. Nika! 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 I yelled as the gates were pulled up and the fight began. The first beast out of the gate, not even waiting for the gate to fully lift, was Goliath the Triceratops. The bellows of the herbivore filled the arena briefly, overwhelming the cheers of thousands, as Prince the Spinosaurus soon followed. His roar even louder than Goliath as they collided in the center of the stadium, with every person screaming. Nika! As Goliath's horn started to cut Prince's chest, where the rib cage met the arms. The glancing blow drew first blood, but I knew that wasn't even close to a killing blow, as Prince's claws held back Goliath's head from getting closer, and the fanged thumbs dug into the Triceratops' eyes, as the bull Triceratops' bellow turned from rage to pain, as the prince dragged the blinded herbivore over to the pond. Even blinded, Goliath bellowed and tried to swing his horns, but not being able to see where to stick his horns, as he was taken out of the fight almost immediately. Blinded, bleeding, and beaten, Goliath let out a mournful wail of lonely pain, far from his herd, as Prince dug his claws further into the eyes, as it finally tore into the poor creature's brain, leaving it dying and paralyzed in the water. Silence fell across the stadium from such a quick and violent end. Death was not new to anyone on Primeval. Life expectancy was short for most people. Death was often cruel, senseless, and personal. Performances like these are meant to make death a spectacle, something to give entertainment and meaning to the people of Primeval. It was supposed to be a display of warrior spirit, strength, and an extended brawl where it could end almost any way. They weren't supposed to be like this. In less than a minute, the beast from the East Kingdom killed the beast of the West Kingdom. The symbolic value was unspoken, but clear to everyone who was watching in stunned silence. The only sound was the sloppy bites of the Spinosaurus and the splashes of the pond below. The best bull of shepherd fell to a king's pet in less than a minute. The story of being a humble hero with humble roots meant nothing in that fight. A humble hero could come from nowhere and still fall to a spoiled king in less than a minute, with no hope of victory. The fight between the heroes hasn't even started, and already it was clear that Fisher was going hard after everyone. Still, I wondered for a moment where Deathjaw was, when I saw splashing in the pond below, and I smiled when I saw familiar eyes in the water. This was the downside to winning the first round of an all-out fight like this. Predators prioritize their food over fighting others, unless someone is actively fighting them for it. So while Prince was eating his spoils of Goliath, Deathjaw quietly swam closer and closer to the feasting super predator. There were cheers in the audience, some yelling at Prince to notice, and others yelling for Deathjaw to get her bite in. The large crocodile was large for her kind, but not as heavy as the Spinosaurus, but that may work in her advantage for this attack. Prince greedily gulped up the red meat standing in the water, which gave Deathjaws her opportunity. She lunged forward, aiming for Prince's neck, but she just missed and instead sank her jaws where Goliath tried to gore the 6-ton predator. The roar that filled the stadium could rival the Spinosaurus's roar, as everyone cheered for the initial winner to be taken down a peg, as the crocodile hung on tight as Prince tried to fight back. Unable to bring his jaws to his chest, his claws uselessly scratched the back of Deathjaw as he tried to pull away, and it took a few times before Deathjaw let go, and Spinosaurus stood safely on the land, breathing hard and bleeding harder. The wound looked nasty, but Prince was standing, and now he knew not to get close to the water. So it seemed they were at a stalemate, for now. He couldn't enter the water without being vulnerable, and Deathjaw couldn't leave it without being vulnerable. I was so caught up in what was happening, I forgot about Smiler, the final beast of the fight, the smallest of the fighters, and also the only one to go completely uninjured so far. Apparently, it was waiting for an opportunity, and it saw it as it ran forward from the shrubs, and it lunged towards Prince's left, severing the tendon as it ran by with its powerful claws as it ran back into the trees, hidden again as Prince tried to attack, but was far too slow to hit the much smaller, much faster dinosaur. Baryonyx and Spinosaurus may be distant cousins, and they may look similar, minus the scale and size of course, but the Baryonyx was also clearly very intelligent. Even after going days without eating, it didn't go after the food. It went for the kill, and damaging the much larger predator. It retreated where it couldn't be found. Prince was left bleeding from 2 wounds now, dragging his left foot as he let out a pained whimper as he tried to retreat back into the gate where he entered the arena. Apparently scared and hurt, he was now trying to retreat to safety. He whimpered as he staggered to the gate, and Smiler tried to attack again. Jumping from the top of a log onto Prince's left arm, long claw marks were left on the arm as Prince roared and threw Smiler into the wall. There was a loud whoomp through the entire arena as Smiler fell into the brush, not clear if it was dead or alive, as Prince whimpered, still making his way to the gate. There was a loud splash as Deathjaw leapt from the water in a surprise to everyone as she ran forward, mostly on her back legs with her front legs tucked up to her chest, as she ran on 2 legs towards Prince. Her jaws clamped around Prince's neck as she pulled him down. Her claws beat her against her head, one claw managing to remove her right eye, but she did not let go as her powerful jaws crunched cracked and crushed her adversary's neck. The crack was heard by everyone, and there was silence again as Deathjaw took down Prince. This upset was a lot closer to a traditional fight. It took time to find the winner, and there were good hits in by both. And you could see situations where one or the other could win. Although there was the question of was Deathjaw the last one standing, or if Smiler was still in the fight. Deathjaw continued to drag her prey to the pond when there was a sound of cracks in the arena below. Confused, I tried to find the source, but I could not see the source, except to see that a log that was laid up straight to resemble a tree was knocked over. It missed Deathjaw easily, but it did block her route back to the pond, leaving her on the land. Smiler was still in the fight, and she was just as clever in the arena as she was in the Southern Kingdom. There were calls down in the arena that sounded like the call of an injured child, except the words were nonsense. I fell down. I broke my leg. I broke down. I fell my leg. The voice called out, and I knew that was Smiler. But there was silence again in the crowd, and as we all watched. Small dinosaurs have never lasted this long. Everyone has heard stories about intelligent dinosaurs that were smart enough to take on large predators and were smart enough to fool people into searching the jungle. Seeing it was something else, though. Deathjaws looked into the forest and snapped her jaws open and shut. She was trying to intimidate her quarrel, and she was away from the pond. She was vulnerable, although vulnerable did not mean the same as easy prey, especially since her quarrel was a lot smaller than she was, and she could snap up Smiler in just a single bite. If she could bite Smiler. Smiler crawled out of the brush and climbed up the log, silent and hard to see. Her black scales glistened on the log. She leapt towards Deathjaw's head, her claws aimed for Deathjaw's remaining eye. As her feet slashed out Deathclaw's remaining eye, as he was violently whipped around, knocking Smiler back into the brush, where she disappeared again. Even if it was being sneaky, even if it appeared supernatural, Smiler was still a mortal creature. It was taking damage being tossed around, and even if it wasn't showing it, it was hurt, and hurt animals are incredibly dangerous and unpredictable. Although the same could be said for Deathjaw. She was blinded and backed into a corner, not able to reach her pond. Injured and cornered, though she was desperate, tired and blind, which made her only more dangerous as she had nowhere to retreat, so that only gave her one way out for her: to fight. All she had to do was wait for Smiler to act. What no one was expecting was for another cracking noise to be heard as another tree began to fall. This tree fell right where Deathjaws was, not being able to see where the noise was coming from, just hearing. So hearing the noise, she assumed that was where her quarrel was as she lunged towards the falling tree. As the tree narrowly missed her head and instead fell on her chest, pinning her down to the ground and crushing her chest. Although she did not die right away. The log pressed her down, and it was clearly crushing her as she struggled to try and move or breathe. And it was only here where Smiler left the shadows and stalked the dying Dinosuchus. She couldn't even hiss at Smiler as it took her heavy claws and clawed the sides of Deathjaw's belly that was sticking out of the side of the log. We watched as Smiler methodically gutted its helpless opponent. The rules were clear that we couldn't interfere as long as there was more than one survivor, and Smiler was taking advantage of that fact. We watched as it peeled back the armor and the plating on Deathjaw's exposed tail and head, revealing the tissue beneath. There was silence and horror from the audience as we watched Smiler take its time with Deathjaw. Sometimes it would take a bite or two, but for the most part, Smiler was content with causing as much pain as possible, torturing Deathjaw as it sliced, cut, and peeled away at the Deinosuchus's flesh. There was something wrong with this creature, and now everyone else could see it as well. Predators could be cruel, they could play with their food, but very few predators torture their prey after they're caught, and far fewer choose to torture over eating. Smiler hadn't been fed in weeks, and even then its mind was just as sharp as ever. It helped take down Prince. It was smart enough to wait until everyone else was exhausted, and it figured out how to crush its enemy underneath a log. That kind of foresight and intelligence from a beast is something that everyone fears, and everyone doesn't know how to handle. When Smiler got its fill, it retreated to its gate that shut behind it, locking it inside. It took Deathjaw a long time to die, hours to die, and we could only watch, terrified of breaking the rules. And we also hated ourselves for refusing to help this poor creature while she was in agony. Sure, it was one of the most dangerous predators on Riggs, but she was still a living thing, and she suffered and suffered before she finally died, and we cleaned up the arena. I spoke to the monarch about this, and we are in agreement. Tomorrow was not going to be a normal fight. Fighting against Smiler again wasn't going to be easy. The only way I was able to beat it last time was by wearing it down across weeks, following it across the deltas until finally it collapsed from exhaustion. And even then, I wasn't sure if it wanted to escape or if it wanted to be caught. I discussed strategy with the monarch, and we came up with a game plan for tomorrow when I fought the other warriors. The next day, I ate light and I stood in the same arena that was once full of the blood of beasts and was now empty of blood, trees, and water, just full of brown dirt as we stood in the middle of the arena. All of us were facing our leaders except for Fisher East, who faced an empty throne where he was supposed to sit. 3 of us bowed our heads to our leaders and then bowed before the matriarch who sat in her own box. Fisher refused to bow at all. We all carried one weapon each. Fisher had his legendary axe, Diamond had her war hammer, and Shepard carried his sling with a pouch full of sling bullets. I only carried a shield made from meteorite iron. All of us were completely armored as we prepared for our fight. We turned to each other as we all took 10 paces back, as we all faced each other. My shield in hand as I stepped back and I examined my opponents. Both Diamond and Fisher were known for going into blood rages, and they were very strong. Definitely stronger than myself. And while we won't kill each other, and we definitely aren't aiming to maim each other, it would still hurt. Still, the way both Diamond and Fisher were eyeing each other, and Shepard was watching me closely as he put his sling bullet in his pouch, told me what I needed to know. A bell was rung across the arena as the fight began. Our goal was to disarm each other as a sign of victory, so only one weapon was allowed, along with our armor. although anything in the arena could be used except another opponent's disarmed weapon. Fisher chopped at Diamond as she brought her hammer down on the axe. I passively paid attention to that fight as a cheer rang through the Northern Kingdom as the hammer of a simple blacksmith shattered the red wood handle of the Raider King. He fell to his knees in a simple sign of yielding with his weapon disarmed. Even from this distance, I could see his anger, and the sheer silence of his kingdom spoke far more than any loud cheers from the rest of the arena. Losses were nothing new, but usually even the heroes who fall in seconds are still cheered. The pride of their kingdom, people, and of Riggs. Fisher was not the pride of his kingdom. He was feared, he was reviled, he was obeyed. But in that moment when he fell alone, with no one to cheer him up, no one to yell at him to get back up and fight again. How lonely would I have felt in that moment where Fisher felt rage. But the very fact that I would have felt lonely in that moment is why I am the pride and the hero of the Southern Kingdom. I seek to make the world a better place. I want fairness, and I am willing to sacrifice myself for that. I would sacrifice myself today to make sure that my kingdom would smile tomorrow. Fisher would sacrifice his entire kingdoms tomorrow for his own smile today. As I examined what was happening with Diamond and Fisher, I also charged towards Shepherd. Shepherd was the only one who could hit from a distance. Slings are quite deadly. They're able to kill from up to half a kilometer, and they can kill at places that even arrows and javelins cannot. Hunters have used slings to take down larger dinosaurs, and small warrior bands have been able to halt entire armies with slings and arrows. Even though Shepard's bullets were hollow clay bullets, so he wouldn't kill us, however, it would still hurt if it hits, and they whistle through the air as they fly towards me. In just a few seconds, Shepard was already throwing a bullet towards me as I held up my shield. I heard the crack of the bullet on my shield as I ran towards him. As I ran at him with full speed, my shield slammed into Shepard, knocking him down. Still paying attention to what Diamond was doing as I knocked down Shepard, I pivoted, ducking beneath her hammer as my shield slammed into her armored chest. The clang was loud and it shocked her. There was a shocked gasp in the audience as people realized that knocking Shepard back actually knocked him out of Diamond's way. I pivoted on my heels again as I stepped behind Diamond. Her helmet kept me out of her eyesight as I stepped behind her, and again I slammed my shield into the back of her knees. Her armor had a small space behind her knees to allow her to move as she fell forward on her knees, and she still clutched onto her hammer. Her determination was impressive. Even on her knees, with her armor dented and unable to see her prey, she was still in the fight. I could see her white knuckles from gripping the hammer as she wanted to swing her hammer my way, but being unable to see me, it would only leave her easily disarmed. Even in battle, she still was thinking about what it took to win. And in that moment, Shepard scrambled to his feet as he grabbed his bullet as I ran towards him, carefully avoiding Diamond, but keeping track of her movement while I ran towards Shepard. My shield held up again as he braced for the impact like before, only for me to pivot as I sidestepped left around him. My shield arm extended as I slammed it into his back, pushing him down to the ground again, this time on his hands and knees. And in that moment, all of the others were on their knees. While Diamond and Shepard were both still in the fight, the symbolism was not lost on the matriarch, and definitely not lost on all of the kingdoms. Win or lose, I brought everyone else to their knees with only a shield, and I was still standing. Only now I would have to bring the fight to an end. I could hear the cheers of my kingdom, and I could hear the other kingdoms yelling for their champions to rise. I could have won, kicked dirt in their eyes, stepped on their weapons, causing them to drop it, or even just kicked them. However, in the spirit of the Solstice Ceremony, I stood, and I waited for them to rise and stand. It is a common misconception that in games like these, you push for every advantage, and you fight dirty to get ahead. Such actions might make you win the fight, but they will make you hated even among your fans. No one loves a champion who wins by technicality and by playing dishonorably. They love clever twists, people acting in unexpected ways, such as beating someone with a shield. However, they don't want to watch the hero of their kingdom execute someone in cold blood, and they don't want to watch their hero steal a weapon from someone who is down. After a few seconds of cheering, "Nika!" both Diamond and Shepherd stood up. Fisher was still on his knees and his eyes full of fury, as the fight was ready for the next round. I could see that both Diamond and Shepherd were now willing to fight me together before trying to fight each other. A dangerous place to be, certainly, but it would only make the glory in the end all the more worth it. Shepherd hid a clay bullet into his pouch as he began to twirl his sling, and still Diamond held her position. I was certain that Shepherd would throw the clay bullet and Diamond would charge as I lifted my shield to protect myself. Sure enough, after only a few more seconds, Shepherd let go of his sling, and I did something unexpected. I did not try to block the bullet, and in that split moment as the sling was let loose, Diamond swung her hammer, and I held my shield up to defend against the hammer. Letting the sling bullet hit me in the gut, even through the armor, and with the hollow clay bullet, the wind was knocked out of me as I held up my shield, as the edge of the hammer face was caught on the edge of my shield. My advantage finally here, I twisted my shield arm as I wrenched the hammer out of Diamond's hands. Her strength is great and powerful, however, she is not used to people trying to wrench it out of her hands. She is too used to battling dinosaurs and iron. Both are very durable, but aren't in the habit of fighting against the weapon itself. Her hammer wrenched into the ground, Diamond fell to her knees as well. Unlike Fisher, her kingdom cheered even louder for her when she fell to her knees. Even my kingdom cheered her name as everyone was proud of her battle. Even with a loss, it was a good fight, and she still took down Fisher. A great fight. Thank you, I told her with my hands, as I turned to Shepherd. While I wasn't able to see her face behind the helmet, I was certain she was smiling. Now it was just Shepherd and myself. He backed up as I pulled away Diamond's hammer. I could see his hands were shaking, his right hand holding his sling, and his left hand began to lift as he was getting ready to signal his surrender. By lifting his left hand with both his index and middle fingers pointing up, he would show to the crowd he was conceding to me. While some people showed it by throwing away their weapons, formally the process of surrender is on your feet with your left hand up. Being on your knees yielded the fight, but it did not mean that you gave up. If Shepherd gave up, he wouldn't just be giving up this fight, but the next part of the fight. The one against Smiler. "Don't do it," his kingdom chanted. "Nika!" rang through the other kingdoms. His kingdom still believed in him, and I could see that he had doubts in both fighting and in surrender as he was about to lift his left hand. In response to him about to surrender, I had to act quickly, to preserve both his honor and my glory. I unstrapped my shield from my right arm, which caused Shepard to pause. There was silence in the stadium as they tried to figure out what I was doing. As I removed the shield and I held it in my left hand, directly out in front of me, ready to drop my shield at a moment's notice. It took a moment as whispers spread across the stadium. When people realized what I was doing, people stood up and cheered both our names along with Nika. Nika, Lancer! Nika, Shepherd! Nika! My shield out, ready to drop. If Shepherd was going to surrender, then so was I. There would be no winner, no hero of Kinich, no one to lead the fight against Smiler. And people were cheering, not for us both to surrender, but because I wasn't going to let Shepherd quit the fight. Whether he won or I won, it was going to be through our battle, not because someone gave up. If he truly respected my strength, he would not want me to give up. And the very fact I was not letting him give up meant that I was respecting his strength. And everyone knew that. Even if he lost this fight to be the best hero, the very act of fighting meant that he was still a hero. Giving up so close to the end would show everyone he was not a hero. He was a coward. So here we were. We are either both heroes or we are both cowards. He might be willing to see himself as a coward, but he did not see me as a coward. And I did not see a coward in him. I saw a hero who was going to lead his kingdom. Now everyone else was going to see that as well. Shepard smiled beneath his wooden helmet as he lifted his left hand to his helmet, and he removed the helmet, leaving the wooden Triceratops head on the ground. As I smiled in turn, and I began to restrap my shield onto my right arm. Shepard and I were both still in the fight. The four kingdoms of Riggs cheered, Nika! As Shepard waited for my shield to be strapped on. His helmet was removed. It narrowed his vision. Now he had a full view. He withdrew a clay bullet as he placed it in his sling pouch, and he began to twirl it again. I smiled as I charged towards him, my shield hiding my body. As I heard the whistle and flying dirt bit my feet as I ran towards him, knocking him down onto his back again. His sling went flying from his hand as he fell, and the last of my opponents were defeated. I stood facing towards the matriarch who sat in her private box. I bowed my head, and the cheers of my name rang across the four kingdoms as I proved to be the strongest of the heroes of Riggs. Now I was one of the heroes of Kinich, a hero of the sun. I let the calls of Lancer wash over me for a second before I reminded myself. Lancer, you are mortal, I told myself as I walked over to where Shepard's sling fell. Silence fell across the stadium as people tried to figure out what I was trying to do. I picked up Shepard's sling, and I walked to where Shepard was now on his knees, having picked himself up from his back. Normally, the heroes who fall are told to rise after champion has left. What I was doing was not something that has been done in a very long time. Something that was not done since the matriarch fought in these halls. I handed Shepard his sling, and I offered him my hand. A hero's role is to pull others up, even those who oppose us, I say to the crowd as I pull Shepard to his feet, to the gasps and quiet murmur of the crowd. Even my spouse looks surprised, and the matriarch is standing from her seat, her hands clasped together in pleasant surprise, and she was smiling. For the first time in decades, The matriarch was smiling. I walked over to where Diamond's hammer fell. I brushed off dust from the handle as I walked over to where Diamond was kneeling. Her hammer too heavy for most to lift, let alone wield, and I carried it to give it back to its owner. I bowed at my waist as I handed the two-handed weapon to the blacksmith, who was mystified, but she took the hammer and stood up straight before I straightened out, and I called out to the stadium, and I spoke in hands to her. A hero trusts before mistrusting, I said out to the crowd to cheers as I walked over to where the axe head fell. I picked it up, brushing off the wooden splinters, and I could see rust on the blade where blood fell. Fisher didn't even bother to try and wash the blood off the blade. Still, as disgusted as I was, I had to give Fisher a chance. A hero never attacks, I said as I handed the axe head to Fisher, and I offered my hand to him. He refused my hand as he stood to his feet with myself still bowed at the waist, my neck vulnerable to his rage. He lifted his axe as he brought it down to my neck. He saw his chance in my vulnerability that I gave him. However, what he saw as vulnerability was not weakness, but compassion. I slammed my shield into his stomach, which caused him to drop his axe before the axe could touch my neck, as the guards came running from the gates to take away Fisher. A hero always defends, I said, finishing my earlier statement. I figured Fisher would turn on me, but I gave him a chance, and he decided to turn on me immediately. He gained power through violence, and so he was willing to take violence to overthrow me immediately. He was taken away to be imprisoned. He lost his chance to fight as a hero. He would never lead again. And as I stood up straight, I waved to the crowd with the other two champions. The Eastern Kingdom was now in an interregnum, and there would have to be another leader. At another time. For now, there were only cheers at the downfall of the old dictator, and in discovery of how the fight tomorrow would go. As we stepped aside and we walked through the tunnels, Shepard spoke to me. Briefly. Wait, you were going to be the next matriarch? He asked, and I nodded. Yes, I was chosen to be next, so this is my first challenge for that role. I told him, and he realized something else. Wait, this is your first challenge. So if you lost, you would no longer be considered for the matriarch role? He asked, and I shrugged. Exactly. If I lost, I would have no more challenges, and I would just live out the rest of my life as the wife to my monarch. I told him, as he said, the final connection. So, if I quit, you wouldn't have just been giving up the chance to be a champion. You would have given up being a matriarch. That isn't like giving up a trophy. That's giving up your entire future. And you would have willingly given up your future for me, someone you just met, he asked me, and I turned to him. Yeah, exactly. You were going to give up, and you needed a reminder of why we were here. I couldn't imagine giving something up like that, not for a total stranger. I couldn't imagine giving up power, glory, and prestige for someone else. And yet, you were willing to save your future for someone else. You're already on the right path, Shepard, I told him, as I said goodbye to both him and Diamond, who still hadn't spoken a single word the entire time we were here. When I made it back to my spouse, I was seen by healers, and I was given a chaste kiss on my forehead. I smiled from their kiss as the matriarch asked to see me alone. Even the monarch of the Southern Kingdom bowed their head to the matriarch as they stepped out. They were unaware of the challenge given to me by the matriarch, and it hurt to hide it from them, but I couldn't let any unfair advantage come forward. The matriarch told me that I did well, and my next task would be to kill Smiler with the other champions. I agreed eagerly, and with that she left me alone to prepare to meet with the other champions and the leaders of the kingdoms. That night we feasted together. Champions and royalty sat together on the same table as we made our plans for Smiler. Tomorrow we would have all of our weapons. However, Smiler was an intelligent and cruel beast. So even though that baryonyx was smaller than most beasts, it was at least as deadly as all of the other beasts of Riggs. A plan was made and we went to sleep, as our next fight was going to also be at noon the next day. The next day we stood in the same arena, fully armed, and we faced the gate that had Smiler. We stood ready, myself in the front. The baryonyx was very intelligent, and intelligent beings could hold grudges. I was giving it that target. Behind me, Diamond readied her hammer, and Shepard was already twirling his sling as the gate was pulled up, and behind the gate, Smiler stepped forward. Its teeth glowed white in the dark as the predator ran towards me with murderous intent. Thankfully, even though it was smart, it was not wise. Smiler bounded towards me, claws extended as Shepard loosed his bullet, and it cracked as it was slung into the creature's skull. Smiler fell to the ground, blood falling from its skull as I ran forward, lance in hand as I thrust it towards the dinosaur's neck. Sure enough, the dinosaur grabbed at my lance with its clawed hands as it held back my thrust for a few seconds. While Smiler was focused on me, Diamond swung her hammer on its arms, breaking them both in a single swing, so my lance could thrust into the creature's neck. Blood gurgled from the baryonyx's neck as I withdrew the lance, and we still stood at the ready. Even dying animals are dangerous, and more than a few people have died to animals that should have been no longer dangerous because they were dying. We watched as the creature died. In its final moments, it did not try to fight. It did not try to scream. It did not roar. It did not try to attack us. It only stared at us as its life bled out onto the soil of the arena. Smiler let out its death rattle as the three of us turned to the audience, and people cheered us on for killing the criminal lizard. Still, I felt something haunting from that beast's final moments. Wild animals don't act that way. Whatever Smiler was, it wasn't a mindless beast. And if Smiler isn't mindless, how many other mindless beasts out there are actually incredibly intelligent and dangerous? I turned to the other champions, my new friends, as we enjoyed the cheers and applause. Whatever problems I will face in the future, I will not face it alone. There are many heroes in Riggs, and like the Solstice Ceremony showed, it doesn't take one hero to best the monsters of the world. It takes many who unite against a common threat. They faced towards the matriarch, and I remained standing straight as for the first time the matriarch bowed towards us.